And my name is David Dunn. I work for the University of Missouri at the Fisher Delta Research Center in Portageville, Missouri. That's my email address. If this generates any questions, you have any suggestions, that kind of thing, don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you might have. Our topic today is managing rice straw, and more specifically, I'm going to talk about to burn or not to burn. I did want to introduce my speaking partner, Ronnie Berry from Southeast Missouri also. I'm going to talk about some research that we did there in Missouri into the effects of burning rice straw, and Ronnie's going to focus more on the reasons and economic reasons or a farmer perspective why I can do it. I'm really proud of the fact I farm 6 acres of rice, and like some of our speakers have talked about before, if it comes to nothing, I'm not out a lot, I still get paid. Ronnie, on the other hand, multiply that by 1,000 or 2, and if there's a mistake there, it comes out of someone's pocket. So anyway, with that, jump into this. And I did want to recognize the Missouri Rice Research and Merchandising Council for supporting this activity. These guys do a really good job, supporting research there and directing the research in very practical ways. And the University of Missouri and the Fisher Delta Research Center recognize that, and we recognize that this is hard-earned money on your part, and we try to make the best use of it we can. Had a roadmap where I'm going. Start with the value of rice straw, why burn. Some of those topics I'm gonna throw to Ronnie. He has much more insight into why burn, and then get to the real meat of what I'm talking about. What's the effects of burning? What's the effects on the straw that's left over? What's the effect on the soil? And what's the effect on the next year's crop? Draw some kind of preliminary conclusions, and maybe talk a little bit about where we should go next. And maybe at the end of the whole ordeal, we could have a discussion about that. Anyways, did want to point out, the Missouri rice growing region. This technically from this line south is the boot heel, but we count this whole thing. It's basically the Mississippi alluvial valley, formed from the deposition from the Mississippi River and Ohio River over the years. There are 2 basic rice growing regions. One is west of Crowley's Ridge, and Crowley's Ridge is this structure here over in this area. It's a silt loam soil over clay hardpan. Has a CEC 12 to 18. Been farmed for rice for quite a while, and P&K fertility must be maintained in this area. Our rice farm is right in this area. Ronnie's farm is over more this way. That's distinctly different than the heavy clay soils that are found to the east of Crowley's Ridge. These are sharky clay soils, have a shorter history of rice production. A lot of them are very recently graded. Very heavy clays, 20 to 35 CEC, and a lot of them still have a fairly significantly high native P&K values. We don't have to maintain that fertility as close. Anyways, what is the value of rice straw? I think a lot of farmers are very familiar with the negative value of rice straw in your ways you try to till, but it does have a value. At harvest, this is about what rice straw contains in terms of NP and K. If I assign some values to that, it ends up, 80 pounds of nitrogen, 16 pounds of phosphorus, and 192 pounds of K. Assign an economic value of that's about $144 in value. That's if you have 4 tons per acre of it out there, which may be a high value. However, rice straw decomposition, when it decomposes under flooded conditions, under anaerobic conditions, it takes quite a bit of nitrogen to decompose it. And a little bit worse than that, some of the breakdown products capture nitrogen and hold it very tightly. So that if you're growing rice, following rice, and you're adding fertilizer, nitrogen to it, you might need to add more nitrogen to it. Might have a value for ethanol production. When we originally started this work way back around the turn of the century. You're thinking about making ethanol out of rice straw, cellulosic ethanol. So maybe there's some value to be had there too. Interestingly, my cousin farms in Iowa, and they built a cellulosic ethanol plant there where they took corn stover and turned it into ethanol. They went and bought bales of corn stover from a 50-mile range around this plant. They paid him $7 for a 500-pound bale. As it turned out that he asked me one day, well, what's the P&K value of that? How much fertilizer am I exporting when I sell them this 500-pound bale for $7? It turns out that's $3 to $4 of P&K contained in that. So it does have a value for ethanol. It does have a P&K value. Animal feed. I looked this up on the internet, and this is what it told me, that rice straw, doesn't have much protein in it. Should not be used as cattle feed, except for very sparingly. So, it may or may not have a slight value to it. Anyways, why burn rice straws? And these are some of the reasons that I came up with. Reduce amount of residue, more effective tillage, weed control. Duck hunting. A guy I leased a pit from one year told me, well, I burned it. That way the ducks can see the rice, the extra rice on the ground. They'll see a lot better. You have a lot more ducks in there. I don't know about that. He also told me that the ducks preferred to eat rice that had been burned a little bit because it kept it from sprouting, so it was a much better situation for them. Any other thoughts? And maybe when it's Ronnie's turn to talk, we can flip through that a little bit. I did want to turn to one other, why burn rice straw, and from my standpoint, maybe not from a producer standpoint, that this project was very fun for me. I like burning. I employ a crew of young people, and what I'd say in the summer, we're going to the rice farm tomorrow. Oh no, I got to take my mom to the doctor. Oh no, my dog's sick. Oh no, I've got homework. We're not going to the rice farm. But when it comes fall, it's like we're going to the rice farm and we're burning straw tomorrow. We're all in, everybody. I'll be there early, that kind of stuff. But anyways, there's my dog. Smiley is her name. But we burned the rice after we hunted in the morning, and she likes burning it because it warms her up there. What the heck? I will say that no dogs were injured in the result of this research here. Anyways, we came with two questions that the producers in Missouri were interested in answering about their burning practices. What effect does it have on soil fertility? I manage a soil testing lab, so I thought I was in a pretty good position to answer that. And what effect does burning have on the following soybeans crop? One thing that I do need to point out that this research applies only to a rice soybean rotation, and not really talking much about rice, continuous rice, and controlling that. And Ronnie might get that to a little bit. But with that in mind, a study was begun in the fall of 2016. What we did is we established plots, following the rice harvest, and used three methods of straw preparation. Either no prep, and we used a platform header too. The results might be different if we had used a stripper header or whatnot. No prep, left it like it was, rolled it, or mowed it. And we compared these to the straw left as it was, either no prep, rolled, or mowed, and 100% removed, where we took a rake and took it off like maybe we were going to bale it or something. Rice and soil and rice straw samples were collected immediately before or after burning to see what the immediate effects were. And the same samples were collected regularly over the winter. Soybeans were cultivated in 2017, and at the end of that crop year, we did the same thing with the 2018 crop. We did a couple different things in 2017 versus 2018. In 2017, my first year doing it, after the harvest, I was very nervous. What happens if it starts raining? And I can't get the burning accomplished. And the Rice Council's going to be mad at me because I've taken their money and I haven't done anything. So immediately after the harvest, I went out there with a high rate of gramoxone and sprayed my plots. I thought that'd dry them down so I get this burning accomplished pretty quickly. It turns out we had excellent burning weather that year. That wasn't necessary, but that's not something a producer would do. So that's a little bit different in that respect. In the other difference in 2018, well, in 2017 we accomplished our burning in October. In 2018, Ronnie asked me, well, we don't burn then. We wait till, it's dried down a little bit. Why don't you wait till December, January to get that accomplished? So we waited to December that year. Did not have to use the Remoxone or whatnot. The same thing happened. It got to be December and I'm getting nervous, I got to get this accomplished. I got to get this accomplished. So I probably burned it a little earlier than I should. And I've come to realize that I'm much different than a producer. My thing is I want to get this done, so I'm willing to take a chance on a windy day or when conditions are less than ideal, because I have a pretty good crew and I have a good way of isolating this so it doesn't get out of hand. A producer might be getting anxious about doing it and not have that luxury. I have to wait. Environmental conditions are such that I have to wait another week, in spite of the fact that it might rain and all plans are put asunder. Anyways, I did want to give you a little bit of an idea of our setup there. This is what we did in December of 2018. These are long strips throughout our field, and there's a levee there and a levee there and a levee up there. They were part of a variety trial, and each variety had 2 of these combine passes coming down here. These are combine wheel tracks there, and this is technically a windrow. The material that was harvested was deposited there as we went along. This tended to work really well for us because these wheel rows provide a natural barrier for the fire not getting out of control. But a lot of times I'm asked, what is your setup there? You're burning windrows, you're going across the field, you're using a stripper header, you're using a platform header, and I am burning a windrow. So the information I'm going to show you going forward might not represent your whole field, but it does represent that part of the field that was available to me and I thought would work rather well on that. Here's mowing and rowing. My Joseph Hengler, I was able to trick him into showing up that day and going to the rice farm. We're going to burn. Well, that day we mowed. And anyways, he did that. There I am using my crop circle maker, a 2x4 and a long rope to simulate rolling on that. That's how we did that. And there's the actual burning of it. And I was very impressed this year that we didn't lose control of the fire once. Very pleased. The year before we lost control once, and it was a race. I wanted to show you some of the end products. This is the no prep before burning, no prep after burning. There's Smiley again. This is roll before burning and roll after burning, and you can see that there was probably not as much consumed in this situation. What had happened is we rolled it about a week before we burned it, had some rain on it, and it held the water in there, so we didn't get as good combustion with the rolling that particular year. And here's the mowing, both before and after, and you can see how that worked out for us. I want to show you how we collected our post-burning samples, and these are pie pans here. They're about 1.2 square feet. We went out there and inserted those underneath the rice, did our fire over the top of them, and collected what material was in those. We did that 4 times per plot because I realized that there's a lot of variability in that plot. Went ahead and took an average of that whole thing, and that's how we ended up with numbers from before and after the burning in terms of the straw. I did want to show you some of these straw results, how that worked out. This is in 2017. Remember, this is in October, immediately following the harvest. Before our 3 methods of prep, either no prep, roll, or mow, this is tons per acre of material found out there before burn. tons per acre after burn, looking at the amount of P and K contained per acre out there in the straw before the burn and after the burn. You can see that we only reduced by about a third. This is 64% of what was left over from these numbers. In our best cases, we got rid of 40% out there. Anyways, wanted to contrast that to 2018. And remember, we burned this year in December. Here, look at how much less straw there is out there this year than last. And we got a much better burn, because it was drier. But look how much less P and K was contained, in the straw before and after. I think in that 2 months, a lot of the P and K in the straw was naturally decomposed or leached back into the soil. We'll see how that works out. And there's, how much I was able to make go away. 90% of it, 85%. Much more effective in burning if you wait that 2 months. I could imagine if you waited another 2 months, how much more effective that would have been. Overlay on all that, the P and K content in the straw in October, it was 2% phosphorus and 2.4% potash, and that's better than cut in half in terms of the P and almost cut in half in terms of the K. So, the later you wait, the less there's in there. We collected these samples the year before all the way up until spring, and there does come a point when there's very little P and K left in that straw. Anyway, so I'm going to turn to the P, the soil test results. And these are the pre-burn level, post-burn levels in terms of phosphate, in terms of potash here. And these are samples collected within an hour of each other. We collected them right before we burned, right after we burned. And you can see that quite a bit of the potash that was in the straw is returned immediately to the soil. Same for the phosphate. The question is, what is the ultimate fate of that P and K? Is it in a form that's easily lost? Is it in a form that the soil can grab onto and make use of, or the plants can make use of the following year? Is it in ash that's laying on the surface, and then you have a big rain comes and washes it away, or how does that work? Did the same thing in 2018. Remember, this is December. High levels of P and K in your straw, lower levels here. There was an increase, in all cases, in all situations, but the magnitude of that increase wasn't as much. I think that reflects what was in the straw at the time it was burned. Did want to look at the soil test recommendations. We planted soybeans. We drill seeded soybeans the next spring. Went back and collected soil samples from each of our plots. Asked for a recommendation for 60 bushels of soybeans, and those are here. And you can see that with the no burn situation, we're asking for less P and K to get the same yield. So burning it did cause a reduction in the amount of P and K that was available to the plant, and I calculated some value to that, 69 versus 75. So if you're going to ask me what does burning cost in terms of P and K, this year when I did that, the figure is $6 per acre. I think Ronnie will talk a little bit more about farming is much more than P and K costs in the end, what his costs are in maintaining that. What was interest to me was, when I removed all the straw, my numbers went up precipitously there. I needed to add both more P and K compared to the no burn, and my costs were higher. So the straw does have some value to it, is what I'm trying to get to. Anyways, I wanted to turn to the yield and plant data. The first one we did is emergence, I went out there and rated plants per drill row per foot. You know, in the untreated, where we did nothing to the straw, you know, I had a very much reduced stand out there. You know, and where straw removed, I had many more plants. Turns out that soybeans are pretty, they're able to compensate for a small stand as long as it's pretty uniform going along. Went out at R1 and collected 5 plants, dried them and weighed them, and those are the weights that I found. And these numbers somewhat parallel each other. But there's my yields. You know, it turns out that there was no significant differences between them, but there is a numerical trend. So what I did was, you know, I averaged my burn treatments, my no burn treatments, and compared them to the straw remove treatments. You know, it does look like to me when I burned it, I got more plants per foot. My plants were larger, and you know, my yields were numerically greater. Compare that to the straw removed, where actually, you know, I had a greater stand density and a greater plants per foot, but my yields were somewhat less out there. So, really interested to see what happens this next year when I make my harvest a year from now or so. Anyways, my conclusions on this is, you know, rice straw, you know, does have a value in terms of P and K. And that value decreases over the winter. As that stubble decomposes, it returns that P and K to the ground. So, you know, the effectiveness of burning is clearly linked to timing. You know, the later that I waited, the greater the decrease in material out there. And the more intensively I prepared it, generally increased the burning effectiveness. Leaving it out there was the least effective. Depending on the year and the weather, rolling worked good. Mowing tended to work good too. I think in the process of mowing, I kind of fluffed it up and it worked a little bit better. Yields were numerically greater in my burn plots. I'm interested to see what happens when I do this again the next year. This is 1 year's data. I'm really waiting to see how this turns out again. I'd hate to have anybody. It's easy for me to make a decision for 6 acres of rice that I don't have to live off of, you know, and I realize that you're making bigger decisions on bigger areas that you may have to live off of. Anyways, I did want a big thank you to the rice staff there at Culin. And you guys from Missouri, if you know any of these guys, if you have any influence, I think they all deserve a raise. You know, I couldn't do any of this myself, and these guys are just absolutely great. I have a job at the Delta Center. It takes me much through the week. I usually show up for the rice farm on Saturday. These guys are there every Saturday working. That's absolutely amazing. So if you have it in your ability or your heart to give these guys a raise, I certainly would. Anyways, I turn to questions. Yes, sir.
I'm from South Louisiana, and we used to burn, but it was more for weed control than anything. We had such a bad red rot problem, that's what we used it for. Now, since we started with the Clearfield system, we're not burning anything. And most of it is second crop anyway. So, but our straw management is in the harvest the rice, harvest the second crop, and then in January, February, if it's dry enough, we'll go out there and disc it under. We need the organic matter. So that's one of the points that sometimes needs to be brought up on that silt loam soil. You probably need more organic matter than you do on that. So that's one of the points that I would bring up.
That does bring up an interesting point. I haven't been doing this long enough to really, you know, document the effect on that organic matter, and it's something I'd like to look at in the future. I think Ronnie's going to address the weed control issues on some of that too, and I guess that'd be one of the heading of suggestions. Last thing, and if you know my administrators at the University of Missouri, make sure I told you this. They really like it when I invite you to our field day. Our field day is August 31st, 2018 in Portersville, Missouri. You're all welcome to come there. It's an election year, so we'll have a really fine selection of politicians that would really like to talk to you. Anyway.